Welcome to Radio Horror Tonight. Tonight on Radio Horror, recently a vinyl release came out for a film going all the way back to the late to mid 1980s that I don't think has like a stitch of merchandise out there other than a movie poster and whatever home video releases there are. Hello, Mary Lou, Prom Night 2. No merchandise for this film, and all of a sudden we get this amazing vinyl release, and I was like, oh, I love this movie. I need to have someone on the show from this movie. Why not have the writer on the show to support the Writers Guild? And he's also part of the Directors Guild. And we'll get to that conversation at the end of the show. We're going to talk a little bit more positive at the very beginning of this interview. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Ron Oliver.
Hey, how are you?
Good. You're both a writer and a director.
I am.
You are. Did you first hear about that, like the first ever product for this film to come out when I messaged you about it?
About the LP?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I had no idea. Here's the thing. So I made that movie in 1987.
Right.
In Canada under some deal up there. And, they pay you whatever, and then that's it. I've never, ever heard again from that movie. Occasionally, I got a DVD as a gift about 5 years ago from somebody who was here for Christmas, and they gave me as a Christmas gift the DVD of Prom Night 2. And that was the only time I've ever heard of it. I mean, like literally, it came out in 87, made a whack of dough for Sam Goldwyn. The Samuel Goldwyn Company released it. And they made, bank on that movie because we made it for like $3 or $4 million. I think they made probably like $50 million off that movie. So it made some big, big money. Not for me because, I was Canadian writer. What do I know? So you get screwed over. But anyway, they did that. And that's the last we ever heard of it. And then you sent me that link about the LP. And then coincidentally, at the same time, a great friend of mine here in Palm Springs, who's a record store guy, said, "Oh, dude, I just got a record album of your first movie and you need to sign it for me." I was like, "Wait, what?" So they bought me a copy of it. I have it right here, actually. They bought me a copy of the record as a gift.
Oh.
I was like, "What? This is great." So I had no idea.
That's awesome that they bought that for you. Yeah, I mean, God, it's such a wackadoodle movie. Did you have like complete control of that script, or was that script rewritten under whatever else happened? Because you didn't direct that one, but you directed the sequel, right?
Right, exactly. So
Okay.
Prom Night 2, so I wrote the script. It was called The Haunting of Hamilton High.
Correct, yeah,
And
and it had nothing to do with Jamie's film.
No, God bless her, though, because I bumped into her once years ago at some restaurant. And I said, "John, because of you, I have a career." And she's great. Jamie Lee is like the best. She's totally, everything that's happened to her this year.
Oh, yeah. Huge deal.
She's the real deal, that one. So I wrote the script as a spec script, essentially, for the company I was working for. And they made the movie directed by a great guy named Bruce Pittman. And then the movie didn't work, actually, for a lot of reasons. Much of which was my script, to be honest, because it was my first script, and there was stuff in it that didn't work and stuff that did work. So and a lot of the direction of it. I mean, Bruce was a really good drama director, but not a great horror director. So the producer said, "Let's go fix this movie because we have a lot of money in it." So the editor of the film, a guy named Nick Rotundo, who's since passed, but Nick Rotundo and I sat down in our editing suite with the rough director's cut of the picture, essentially restructured the movie and said, "Okay, what works, what doesn't work?" So from 110 minutes, I think, we cut it down to about 65 minutes, 68 minutes, to be honest. I remember that number, 68 minutes, and said, "Okay, here's what works. Now let's fix this." So I went back in and rewrote a whole bunch of stuff. And then we went back out again with about $100,000 in 10 days. The producer gave us money and said, "Go reshoot the stuff you need to make this movie work." So we went back and reshot like the scary stuff, like the locker room scene, all this stuff, and rewrote a bunch of stuff and reshot it to make the movie work, and then recut it together. And that's what became the movie. So my first, long story short, my first directing gig was directing the reshoots of the first movie I ever wrote. So it was like a trial by fire, to be honest.
I mean, it's so bizarre. I mean, Joe Bob's talked about it, you know what I mean? And it's just like this, it's so far removed from the first film, which was, you know, like just your typical slasher film of the time. And then it just felt like this was like supernatural slasher became a bigger thing in the late 80s because, you know, Jason came back to life as a zombie, and Freddy was always supernatural, and Chucky was supernatural, and Pinhead had just started, you know, Hellraiser just started. Was there influences like that because of the fact that it seemed like the wave of the supernatural slasher horror had started?
Well, oddly, like I wrote the script in 85, probably, 80, late 85, early 86. I want to say that it might have been influenced by Nightmare, but on Elm Street, but I'm not sure because, I mean, that movie had come out in 83 or 84, and I had already been working on this script for some time. Like, I to be honest with you, it was more influenced by, like, Dario Argento. It was more of a Suspiria feeling because I wanted something that was, like, really surreal. All those dream sequences and the surreality of it, that was really the big influence because I was influenced by those pictures more than anything else. And then I think what they did in the marketing of it, they sort of leaned into Nightmare and all of that world because it was sort of hot, the sort of supernatural slasher, weird, you know, altered reality stuff.
Yep.
Again, this is, you know, and I have to preface a lot of what I'm saying by the fact that we're talking about almost 45 years ago.
Ah, yeah.
You know, and there may have been some martinis between here and there, so I'm not going to remember everything.
Oh, wait, no, like 38 years ago. So not 45, not quite yet. 38 years ago.
Dawning at my age, the years that go by so quickly. But yeah, so you're sort of like, you know, you're trying to remember it all, but it was of that ilk, certainly of a supernatural slasher thing. But again, you know, it was not written as a sequel to that movie. It was written as a standalone picture.
Right.
And it wasn't until the Samuel Goldwyn Company came along. So we screened the very first screening of Prom Night 2, which at the time was called Haunted in Hamilton High. We screened it at the, get ready for this, the Alfred Hitchcock Theater at the Warner Studio lot in Hollywood. So no pressure. Hello. The very first screening of it was at that theater. And we had, like, you know, a packed house of a bunch of teenagers we picked up at Fairfax High School and said, come see a horror movie. And they all came there and watched it. And we had all these people there because it was during the American film market, which was a thing back in the day. And they all watched it and screamed and yelled and laughed in all the right places, which was great. And so it was to be its own thing. And then the reality was that the production company at the time called North Star owned the rights to the name Prom Night. So they said, let's just call it Prom Night 2. And so they did. So it was, it's one of those weird moments in, like, not to be too pretentious about it, but one of those weird moments in sort of movie history where you go, let's take a title. And back in the 80s, this kind of happened a lot, I think. Take a title that we own and just make it into something else. And there you have it. So
what did you do the 3 years in between? Because, you know, IMDb doesn't always have every little piece of your information on there, but it seemed like there was like 3 years that you don't have any credits on IMDb before you wrote the next one and then directed it, which, yeah, you probably took some time to write that one too, but what were you doing for those 3 years?
Think about that. So I was doing, I was in Toronto, Canada, because I grew up there. I was hosting a TV show up there, some national TV show. Back when we had VJs, video jockeys, I was a host of the show. But it wasn't so much, it didn't take that long, actually, because I wrote Prom 3, like, almost immediately after Prom 2. But I did a movie called, let me think what they had called it. There was some other movie that the company had that I rewrote and directed chunks of. And then it's a good question because I'm trying to remember exactly what we did. Because we did Prom 2 was 87, question mark?
Yep, and then Prom 3 was 90. Did that have a theatrical release too, by the way?
It did.
90, the Prom 3?
Yeah, it did.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, here's a great story if you like a great trashy Hollywood story.
Yes.
So you seem like the sort. So Prom...
Well, you know what's also funny is that the between 87 and 90, Prom 2 and 3, there was the first writer's strike.
Yeah.
Was that funny?
Yeah.
And it was caused because of video rental stores.
Uh-huh.
Yep. We'll get there at the end of this, but go on. You're with your trashy story.
Every time there's a new place to sell, for people to sell movies, there's a writer's strike or director's strike because they're going, no, wait, you need
Yep.
money for this.
All right. So to your trashy story.
Right. So the trashy story is, Prom 3, I wrote Prom Night 3. I probably wrote it like right after Prom 2. And it just sat in a drawer for like a year or so. Well, because Prom 2 came out, and then the money happened, and then the VHS release happened in probably 88, maybe.
Uh-huh.
The numbers were pretty good for the VHS. I remember that. So they're like, okay, let's make a sequel. So then you gear it up, and there you go. So there's your gap. But so the financial company, the company that made Prom 3, IVE Entertainment, which had been called Live Entertainment, was actually IVE, was owned by a guy named Jose Menendez.
Oh, I know where this is going already.
Now, get ready for this.
Let me tell you something right now. I am a massive, hardcore fan of Fright Night Part 2, and I know everything about that movie and the history about what happened.
Okay.
I based a lot of the mannerisms and the look and feel, and I would just say homage, but you could also say stole certain images from that movie to create my gender-swapped character of Vlada, which is basically the entire story of Dracula, but all the characters' genders are flipped.
So,
yeah.
We go for I fly down, because I'm still living in Toronto at the time. So I fly down with my producer and his wife, and they were dear friends of mine. I just adored them. They gave me my break. They got me into the business. So Peter Simpson and his wife, Alana. So we fly down to Los Angeles, because Peter had an office down there. We fly down to meet with the financier people for Prom 3, because they're like, oh, yeah, we'll make some money. At the same time as they're doing Prom Night 3, they're also doing a little movie called Reservoir Dogs. It was the same company. So we go down and meet with them.
Oh, Reservoir Dogs. Okay. That Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah, nobody ever heard of that guy again.
Okay.
So we come down, and we come down to meet with them. So we're going to go for dinner. We go to dinner at the Trader Vic's at the Beverly Hilton Hotel in Beverly Hills. Great place. We went there for years and years. Tiki bar, We go there, and we're having dinner with Jose Menendez, his wife, Kitty, and his 2 sons. So we go there on a Thursday night for dinner. I'll never forget this. Thursday night dinner. It was great, And I totally had a crush on Eric Menendez, like totally. He was so cute. So there we are at dinner, having a great time. Yak, yak, yak. Deal's done. Handshakes, blah, blah, blah. So we hop on a plane Saturday to go back up to Toronto. Monday morning, I go into the office because we're going to start pre-production on the movie in like a week. I go into the office and Peter says, okay, we're going to have to shut down production for a little bit. Why? Because Jose and Kitty have been killed. I'm sorry, what? Yes, they were shot and killed and in their homes. Like, oh my God, I just had dinner with them. They're so nice.
The night before, like the day before, the week before, right?
This is like 4 days.
Oh my God.
So we had dinner on Thursday. They died on the Sunday. So Monday, we're like, oh my God, this is horrible. And then it all, obviously it all shakes down as what happens in the boys and so on. And so like 2 weeks later, Peter comes back and goes, okay, the money's still there. So we're still making the movie because the company's still working, just that they're dead. So that movie got made on that money, even though, because the money had gone into escrow and then there you are. But it was all part of that whole deal. So Lyle and Eric, of course, obviously killed their parents, and then there you are. So it's a trashy, fabulous part of that story for Prom Night 3 that nobody ever talks about because nobody really remembers the movie. But still, it was like, ooh, mercy.
Well, if it ever gets like a Blu-ray DVD release, because I think maybe the first Prom Night has one, but I'm not kept up on like the home video collector market releases of these films. I know for damn sure 2 doesn't have one. It doesn't even have like a Blu-ray release from like when Blu-rays were coming out. It has kind of a crappy transfer DVD release, the one that you got for Christmas.
Yeah, it does actually. There was a box set of all 4 movies together, but they're all crap releases, and they're like Prom 2 was shot to give Bruce Pittman his due because he's a terrific director. And he and his DP on that movie, they did a beautiful job of that film. The colors are great. It's Technicolor. They shot it like in something akin to Technicolor. It's gorgeous. And it's too bad they haven't done a Blu-ray because it would look great. Prom 3, my DP on Prom 3 is a guy named Rhett Morita, and Rhett and I actually just worked together on a movie last summer, which we hadn't seen each other in years. And it's Prom 3 is a very cartoon looking movie. We shot it on Fuji, like a Fuji film, so it looks like a Warner Bros. Cartoon.
Ah,
But yeah, that was the whole plan of that movie. But Prom 2 is gorgeous, and it should get a, it'd be nice if we got a Blu-ray. But you know what? Also, there have been talks for years about doing a remake of that movie or a reboot or a reimagining, whatever. But the rights are so wrapped up because the company that owned it sold it to another company, sold it to another company. The rights are like obscenely wrapped up.
like Fright Night Part 2, same problem.
Yeah, exactly, and it's too bad because
there's there's also Prom Night 4, Deliver Us from Evil, which I have never seen.
Prom 4 was like a going back to the slasher roots of the movie, and it's like some priest locked up in a basement who comes out and kills teenagers, which seems like a reasonable thing. But yeah, I think I've seen about a half an hour of it. The only thing I remember is there's a guy in it who I got to know a little bit, and he was like, "Yeah, I just had to show my ass." So that's all I remember.
It's funny. I just I do a podcast called the Vampire Movie Minute Podcast, and we cover vampire movies 5 minutes at a time. And we did Once Bitten, and I had so many people on from Once Bitten. Not Jim Carrey, not Laura Hutton, as much as I try with Laura Hutton. And we got to that really uncomfortable scene in the shower, the prison gay assault scene, which looks ridiculous. Right. And we had the writer on, and we had the guy, one of the main characters from that movie on, who played Ron, who was one of Jim Carrey's friends. And we were like, all right, let's talk about the most uncomfortable part of this entire movie. That's just awful. What was it about? And so we had to talk about it. And Ron, the actor who plays that character or whatever, had a blast talking about it. Many years later, removed from it, but at the time, he was like, it's the most uncomfortable thing in his entire life to ever shoot and film.
Well, what's funny is that there was an era like the mid to late '80s. There are all these sort of like really weird coded gay movies. And
that's for sure.
Nightmare on Elm Street 2.
Oh, God. And I'm sorry. I know that's the big... I know that movie is like a big flag rallying cry of gender equality and sorry, not gender equality, LGBT equality for you guys. But it's a terrible movie. No matter what way you look at it. It's just bad.
It's a terrible movie. So, to be able to do anything at all was like, there was a lot of talk about Prom 2, the Hello Mary Lou, being this sort of gay film because it's quite camp, obviously, and Mary Lou Maloney being a little bit of a, somebody said to me, Mary Lou Maloney is what would have happened if The Devil Wears Prada was like a ghost movie, and there was a lot of that in it that maybe I'm sort of was conscious of it because I'm a fairly conscious writer, but there was a lot of that stuff in it. And so there's a whole era of those films that people held on to, certainly a gay audience held on to, because there was nothing else. I mean, you look at like Hellraiser, which is a very gay movie, and obviously because of Clive, and people held on to it because there was nothing else. There were no other films out there, let alone, horror or mainstream, that addressed or even acknowledged gay people. So when you had it, it was like, oh my God, this is a big deal. So Nightmare 2 is not a great movie, but God bless it for existing,
And writing these two back-to-back horror movies and directing one, was that what led you to do work with R.L. Stine's show Goosebumps? I mean, I'm assuming.
Actually, oddly enough, I just talked to Bob last week, in fact, because I'm working on one of his books I'm turning into a movie right now. So what happened was I did Prom Night 3, and I did Prom 3, and then I did a movie for New Line called Liar's Edge, the sort of weird erotic thriller they called them back then, in like 1991. I had just moved to Los Angeles because I think there's a really long version of this boring story I'm about to tell you, but when we did Prom Night 2, the reviews in Canada were horrible.
I heard that, yeah.
Yeah, like mean, nasty reviews. And so I'm standing beside the photocopier machine, like photocopying my suicide note, and this fax comes along from Los Angeles, and it was an LA Times review for Prom 2. There was a rave, like a really nice review. And I thought, well, I'm going to move because I'm not going to, because Canada doesn't get what I'm doing. So I hop on a plane, I move to LA, and that's that. So anyway, so I go down there, I make this movie called Liar's Edge for New Line. We shot in Niagara Falls. Right after that, so I'm sitting in a coffee shop in West Hollywood where I was living, and I got this phone call from this guy named DJ McHale, and DJ was putting together a show called Are You Afraid of the Dark? And oddly enough, I had pitched.
Yeah, that's right. You did that too. I love that show.
It's a great show. And I had pitched to a network in Canada called YTV, this kid like Nickelodeon up there, but Canada. I pitched them an idea of a bunch of kids sitting around a campfire telling ghost stories, and it would be an anthology show, and every week it'd be some ghost story. And he said, well, if you can do it for $50,000 an episode, we'll talk about it. I'm like, yeah, I can't do that. So anyway, I forgot about the idea. And then a couple years down the road, I'm in LA, and DJ calls and said, I got this idea. Kids around a campfire telling ghost stories, and we'll make the movie. I said, you're not going to believe this, but this was an idea I had a couple years ago. He goes, okay, we need to work together. So DJ brings me on to do the first episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark? I remember reading that script in a coffee shop in WeHo, and it was great. I love the script. It was so much fun. And I did like, I don't know, I forget, like 25 of those shows of Are You Afraid of the Dark? And while we were doing that, I think the second season of Are You Afraid of the Dark,
you did you have 2 credits.
On Dark?
If you did more, then IMDb needs to be updated.
Oh, yeah. No, I did like 25 episodes of Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Oh, then I would get on top of your social media guy and be like, yo!
Yeah, no, I did a whack of those.
All right, yeah, that definitely needs to be updated on IMDb.
Yeah, and then, but the second season of that show, Deborah Forte from Scholastic came to me and said, can you come down to New York and we'll talk and we'll... So I flew to New York and we sat and talked about Goosebumps because they were about to start it up. And she said, we want it to be, scarier, but bigger budget and yada, yada. So I said, sure. So I jumped into that and met with Bob R.L. Stein and talked with him and that whole team. And then we got that going. And I don't remember how many of those I did, but a whole bunch of those too, like 5 seasons of it.
Yeah, it only lists 7 episodes on IMDb.
Oh yeah, not even close.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I probably wrote 10 episodes and directed maybe 18 of them or 19.
But every one of your Christmas movies is listed on here.
Of course it is, yeah. But it's funny because Are You Afraid of the Dark? I did like, oh my God, I must have done. I did like 20, 25 episodes of that show.
Yeah, it lists 17 director episodes of Dark and 17 director episodes of Goosebumps.
That sounds close to it, but I'm sure it's a bit more.
And the new Addams Family, too, which I did like. That I love that new version of the Addams Family when it came out. Oh, my God,
I forgot about that show, yeah. Here's the thing, though. There was a whole period. I mean, there was so much of that stuff happened in the mid to late 90s. I was doing, God, I forget how many episodics, but you would hop onto this sort of cycle where you go from show to show to show because they were all doing, this was back when syndicated TV was still happening. So you could go and do all these shows, and it was fun. It was great fun. But you'd go like Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, and do all these episodics. It was great fun. And actually, the Addams Family, that was a good cast. I remember that really well. They were good. Beautiful studio, actually. Gorgeous sets.
The other podcast I do, the Dead TV podcast, we covered every episode of the original Addams Family show on our podcast. And we gave some mention to the other iterations of the Addams Family. Are You Afraid of the Dark has had some weird DVD releases over the years. Never complete sets, I think, mainly because of just like rights with music or trying to track down all the kids and paying them out and things like that can become very complicated.
Yeah, totally. Well, so much, what's funny? So much is about the music. The music rights are a big deal because, you're trying to figure this out because ASCAP. But yeah, it's that's a really tricky thing. So.
What's funny is that on the Dead TV podcast, we did a show. We covered, speaking of music, we'll get right into the last couple minutes about the Writers and Directors Guild, just before the Zoom call cuts us off. Music rights are so weird on TV show box sets or streaming because a lot of low-key bands that just disappear eventually have all sorts of music rights tied up with things, and they have to be cut out of DVD releases. But there's one show in particular we did, Witchblade the series, has songs from U2 on it, and they were still included in the DVD box set.
So we did a show, I did a series in London called Crisscross, and a couple of guys at a private school and yada, yada. wackiness ensues. But there's the law there is for music rights is that this would be really so interesting for your listeners. But the music rights thing is that if it's a UK band, you can have the rights for a certain dollar amount and then worldwide rights for 10% more. So if you can hire a UK band to do your music, so we did the show, we had the Eurythmics and we had U2 and we had the Rolling Stones. Like it was crazy, the music in the show. And then you had worldwide rights on top of that for an extra 10%. It was ridiculous how that works. To this day, those shows exist with these incredible soundtracks, these great bands, because they signed off for 10%. Whereas if you do it in America, I think it's a whole different system.
Just before we let me go, why don't we go into excuse me, some of your thoughts and opinions about what's going on right now with the writer's strike, and as you mentioned, there's a pending director's strike too.
Yeah, well, because all the contracts coming up, Directors Guild, the Screen Actors Guild are all coming up right now. The Writers Guild, we're on strike obviously right now. Well, here's the thing. It's real simple. Every time there's a new distribution system in place, the Motion Picture Producers Association, AMPT, blah, blah, will they ride the train for a while, and they essentially, not to put too fine a point on it, but they don't necessarily give the writers or directors everything that should be owing to them. So, like, for example, I did a movie last year. I wrote a movie last year called Falling for Christmas with Lindsay Lohan. It was on Netflix. And it was watched by 180 million people around the world.
Wow.
Yeah. And this, now, having said that, that movie was made for a budget, and I'm paid reasonably for the making of the movie. But then the back end of the movie is based on an old system whereby you get a percentage for how many people, how wide the streaming of it is. And there are smarter people than me will know this, but the point of it is that the back end of a movie like that should be commensurate with how many people watch the movie. And we're talking about international as opposed to just national, like in America. So it's an international thing. So like if I write a movie for Hallmark or direct a movie for Hallmark, I get a little bit of back end because of residuals, the system that's been set up by people smarter than me before me in the union, in the guilds, who set up a residual structure so that every time it airs someplace, you get a little bit of money, because if they make money, the people creating the show should make money. So the big strike issue right now is the fact that the residual system for international worldwide streaming is way out of whack.
So here,
you're getting
okay, so it's the international streaming. Okay, because somebody asked me at work this question, and I couldn't give him an answer. I know he was being a bit of a smartass about it, but I couldn't give him an answer. He's like, the last time the writer's strike happened, why didn't they write it into their contracts to stop this from happening again? Because isn't it based on technology every time? And I'm like,
no, that's a really good question. It's because it used to be called, the contracts were set up as what's called new media, because back when they did the contracts, 5-6 years ago, new media was like Peacock or Netflix or whatever, HBO Max. That was considered new media, and it wasn't doing huge numbers. So they're going, we'll do a new media deal and it'll be great, and you get a little bit of money, that's it. And then new media now is no longer new media. Now it's just media. So the streaming world took off in a way that I think, certainly during pandemic, which helped a lot, obviously. But new media took off in a way that I don't think anybody anticipated. So in fact, now, like a movie I make gets distributed around the world to literally 180 million people watch this movie, and I get the same amount of money on the back end as if 10 million people watch the movie. So that's the big argument. And granted, again, having said this, I know it sounds like, oh, poor pitiful writer, but the reality is that if the production companies and the studios are making significant bank, which they are, they're making billions of dollars, but none of that money is translated to the creative people who they have hired to make these shows. And it's not like we sign off on it and go, no, we're going to sign off our rights forever. And which if you do, then like in Canada, they do that because they're suckers.
Yeah.
But down here, no, you don't sign off on your rights forever. You say, I'm going to sign off for a significant percentage of the back end. But their back end deal, in terms of Netflix, for example, isn't based on international streaming; it's based on national streaming. So
Gotcha.
that's what the big argument's been. And again, I'm talking to you not as a terribly knowledgeable person about this because that's why we have a guild.
Right.
I got guys working for me. But that's kind of where the argument's been. And so they put pens down and said, no, you guys figure this out. And and they're not asking for the world by any stretch. They're asking for like a 3% bump or something, which is nothing. But it's still, I think it's one of those things where they go, if we give them this, they're going to want this down the road. And the streamers are all crying. They're all crying poor because they're going, well, our numbers are dropping. Well,
I got you.
Yeah, they went up 10 billion points.
So I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. I really do appreciate it, and giving us some insights into your, your career in Hollywood with some interesting stories of things that you worked on.
My pleasure entirely.